Pro et Contra.
Today marks 6 months since the horrific attacks of October 7th, in which Hamas terrorists murdered, mutilated, raped, tortured, and kidnapped innocent Israelis, men, women, and children, from their homes on a Jewish holiday. Since then, the IDF has fought a just war against these savage terrorists backed by the Islamic Republic of Iran. And while the world initially felt sympathy for Israel, within days there were protests against Israel supporting the October 7th attacks. The sympathy for Israel's war has waned, even among some of our allies. But we know that this war is not a war for territory or for petty politics. It's a battle for the very soul of civilization. Israel is leading the world in the fight against Islamist terrorism, which seeks to eliminate the entire West. We do this because we cannot rely on anyone but ourselves for our protection. We do this because it is moral. We do this so that hopefully you, in the West, never have to. We do this because the values of democracy, freedom of religion, freedom of speech are worth protecting. 1,800 deaths, 253 hostages, 604 soldiers, 9,100 rockets from Gaza, 3,100 rockets from Lebanon, and 12,000 terrorists killed. We are all war weary. This is not a war we wanted or started, but it is a war that must be fought to the end. Today, my message is this: if you won't stand with Israel, then at least get out of our way. We don't need your permission to defend our right to exist, and we will not stop until all of our hostages are home and until Hamas is defeated. 4 IDF soldiers were killed in weekend fighting in Gaza. The IDF is continuing the military operations in Gaza while also focusing on the protection of civilians and humanitarian assistance. This as the Army released findings from a probe into the accidental killing of aid workers of the World Central Kitchen. More from ILTV's Steve Leibowitz.
An officer and 3 soldiers from the Commando Brigade Training Center were killed after gunmen came out of a tunnel in a destroyed building, opening fire at troops carrying out a patrol in Khan Yunis. The operatives managed to flee back into the tunnel. Nearby, a tank came under RPG fire by another cell in the area. The tank returned fire, killing members of the terror cell. During activity in Khan Yunis, IDF forces located and destroyed 3 offensive terrorist tunnels that were under surveillance in recent years. Tunnel 1 was uncovered about a decade ago. It was struck during the 2021 Operation Guardian of the Walls, and again at the beginning of the current war. It was finally destroyed over the past week. Tunnel 2 was uncovered in 2014. It crossed into Israeli territory and has now been destroyed. Tunnel 3 was destroyed in the past few weeks. It was uncovered in 2019 with one branch crossing a few hundred meters into Israeli territory. It's since been under full control of the IDF. The tunnel has been struck and the branch that crossed into Israeli territory neutralized. Meanwhile, following an investigation, the IDF released findings on the mistaken attack on the World Central Kitchen cars that killed 7 aid workers in Gaza. The probe found that the strike was ordered against the convoy of WCK vehicles after officers suspected they carried a Hamas gunman, despite a low level of confidence, and against Army regulations. The officers did not identify the vehicles as belonging to WCK when the strike was ordered.
After some of the vehicles split from the others, the forces that were tracking the vehicles that went south did so thinking that these were Hamas vehicles, that Hamas gunmen had entered. This operational misidentification and misclassification was the result of internal failures that led to a critical information regarding the humanitarian operation to not go properly down to the chain of command.
2 senior officers were dismissed and several other top commanders in the IDF formally censured for their involvement in the deadly drone strike.
After the IDF Chief of the General Staff, Lieutenant General Herzi Halevi, accepted the findings, he ordered several disciplinary actions to be taken immediately.
The IDF announced the deaths of an officer and 3 soldiers from the Commando Brigade training base who were killed during fighting against Hamas in the southern Gaza Strip over the weekend. They are named as Captain Ido Baruch from Tel Mond, Sergeant Amitai Evan Shoshan from Azriel, Sergeant Eli Zair from Kedar, Sergeant Reef Harush from Kibbutz Ramat David. Their deaths bring the toll of fallen soldiers in the Hamas war to 260. May their memories be blessed. Well, Israel is facing mounting scrutiny internationally over its handling of the Gaza war as the painful conflict wages on. But is it justified? Here to speak with us about the morality of Israel's war in Gaza 6 months on is one of the leading experts in urban warfare today, the chairman of the Urban Warfare Studies at the War Institute at West Point, retired U.S. Army Major John Spencer. Major Spencer, thank you so much for joining us today. I want to start by asking you about what Israel has achieved 6 months on, and given the fact Israel's facing pressure to implement a ceasefire, what's the right thing to do at this point?
Yeah, I think from every metric, Israel has been able to achieve their goals. They're not done yet. They have to finish the job, but they've been able to destroy 19 of the 24 Hamas battalions, reduce the military of Hamas and its military capability to a very small portion. They've returned half of the hostages home, and they will return them all. They have cleared dense urban terrain within 6 months, massive cities, down to a small portion left to be cleared. I think by every metric, they've been effective, to include the rockets that Hamas still has, and this is why the entire Gaza Strip needs to be searched, but the rockets went from 4,000 a day to 0 or a few intermittently.
Absolutely. Now, much has been said about this 30,000 casualty number provided by Hamas. And of course, they include a high number of children who were allegedly killed. What can you tell us about these numbers based on your expertise in urban warfare? How accurate might they be?
I would be very skeptical of any number provided by Hamas, one, and two, in any battle, in any war, of having a daily running civilian casualty count down to a single digit. I mean, it's a fact there's not been 32,000 civilians killed in Gaza, because the Gaza or Hamas provides numbers without including any Hamas combatant numbers in it. By every metric, the ratio of combatant to civilians, which again is not something I've seen in any other war, but is still historically low for the context of the war. But I would be very skeptical of believing you could have a daily running count to the single digit in any war, let alone in an urban war.
Now, how does the IDF's performance in terms of casualties compare to other modern urban warfare conflicts, whether it be Ukraine or the United States in the most recent wars in Iraq and Afghanistan?
Yeah, Emily, there's three things: lies, damn lies, and statistics. It's really hard to do comparison because no military has faced what the IDF have faced. They haven't faced a combatant of 30,000 embedded in tunnels, over 400 miles of tunnels, 15 to 200 feet underground, that use their civilians as human shields and human sacrifice, because they say they want as many to be killed. But if you were to take like battles of Mosul, Raqqa, Aleppo, other historical urban battles, one, I just never seen anybody do that. Well, what is your combatant to civilian ratio? But even if you did, for some reason, I don't know why you would do that. The really is the IDF being legal, as in following the laws of war, the legal obligation, and taking everything humanly possible to reduce the civilian casualty? That's an absolute yes, they are, and they've done more than any other military in the history of warfare. But even if you took the numbers that Hamas gives and you take the one that Israel's give, because I believe, Israel, a moral, democratic government and a military over a terrorist organization. But even if you took all the numbers, the 1 to 2 or whatever the number is historically low compared to those other battles where you have an enemy embedded in urban terrain who says, I'm not leaving, you have to come get me.
Now, one of the accusations which you alluded to has been that Israel is committing a genocide, or that the IDF's actions and the measure taken or not taken to prevent civilian casualties is simply not enough. What kinds of things have you seen the IDF doing in terms of protecting civilians, of avoiding civilian casualties?
Yeah, it's a long list, actually, but since from October 8th on, one of the biggest things that's ever been done in urban warfare is to get civilians out of harm's way, do evacuations. And the IDF did that. They waited 3 weeks and evacuated 85 to 90% of northern Gaza before even beginning the ground assault. And there's techniques that you use in order to do evacuations, like dropping flyers, sending text messages, making phone calls, sending drones with speakers in, dropping speakers from parachutes. But they've been effective in evacuating urban areas before the start of combat operations. But since the world said that wasn't good enough, they developed other mechanisms. They started giving out their maps, like the maps that I teach people on how to do urban warfare. The IDF gave their maps to the civilians and Hamas and said, okay, in these areas, I will be operating in this area. Please evacuate that and stay out of this area. And basically telegraphing every move that they're making and not taking action, even where it would be legal, whether that's on a building or in an area, until they have high confidence that there are civilians out of those areas. So by every measure, that they've done everything you could physically do other than not do the operation. Because really, that's the alternative that the world looks for. Like, well, you just should not, you should leave the hostages in captivity. You should not do the operation. You should allow the rockets to continue to be targeting Israel's citizens. It's really interesting on what they think the alternative could be.
Well, we are out of time, but I want to thank you for your insight on this, this important issue 6 months on. Thanks for joining us today, Major John Spencer.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Experience the power of truth with ILTV News. If you're looking for quality content and captivating visuals, join our news community and become an integral part of our team as we embark on a mission to unveil the real Israel, dismantling the web of lies and misinformation that surround reporting on Israel. By subscribing to ILTV News, you will not only have access to the latest updates, but you will also amplify our message, creating a ripple effect that carries the truth far and wide. Subscribe today and help reshape the narrative. Available on the web, Android, and Apple.
The campaign of terrorism is continuing, as this morning 2 people were wounded in a shooting terror attack targeting a public bus on Highway 55 in Judea and Samaria. One of the victims, a 19-year-old female IDF soldier, was gravely injured, while the other victim was lightly wounded. The terrorists fled the scene and security forces launched a massive manhunt to find the suspect. As over 100 hostages remain in Gaza, Israel is once again, albeit with pessimism, returning to hostage talks to try to reach a deal. ILTV's Devil Klein has the latest.
Egypt will resume hostage talks this week as Qatar announces they believe a deal is still possible. This comes as Israel has expressed pessimism over the possibility of reaching a deal after Hamas rejected numerous proposals by Israel in prior talks. Most recently, Hamas refused an offer that would see the release of hundreds of terrorists and a 6-week ceasefire in exchange for the release of 40 hostages. Israel has not yet confirmed its participation in the upcoming talks, despite increasing domestic pressure for elections and a hostage deal. Hamas has demanded a permanent ceasefire and IDF withdrawal from Gaza, the release of convicted terrorists, and the return of Palestinians to their homes in Gaza in the north, a combination which Israel is unable to provide, as it would involve allowing the continuance of Hamas. Qatar has been criticized for its refusal to apply pressure to Hamas, even when Israel has expressed flexibility in making a deal. Domestically, the Israeli government faces increasing pressure to make a deal after IDF troops recovered a body of slain hostage Elad Katzir. Katzir's family has harshly criticized the Israeli government for its failure to make a deal to secure his release, as Elad was kidnapped alive and seen while in captivity. It is believed that at least 35 hostages of the just over 130 hostages that were kidnapped 6 months ago have already died in captivity.
It was a tense weekend in the north amid Iranian threats of retaliation for last week's strike in Damascus that killed a top commander of the IRGC in Syria. Meanwhile, the IDF went on the offensive, hitting Hezbollah air defense infrastructure in northeast Lebanon. More from ILTV's Steve Leibowitz.
كونوا أكيدين ومتيقنين أن الرد الإيراني على استهداف القنصلية في دمشق آت لا محالة على إسرائيل.
The warning from the Lebanese terror chief followed those from Iran and led many in the security establishment to hint that a large-scale attack could be imminent. Prime Minister Netanyahu did not back down from the threats.
כבר שנים שאיראן פועלת נגדנו, גם באופן ישיר וגם באמצעות השליחים שלה. ולכן ישראל פועלת נגד איראן והשליחים שלה, גם בהגנה וגם בהתקפה. אנחנו נדע להגן על עצמנו, ואנחנו נפעל לפי העיקרון הפשוט שמי שפוגע בנו או מתכנן לפגוע בנו, אנחנו נפגע בו.
The IDF took the offensive, targeting sites belonging to Hezbollah's air defense unit in the northeastern Lebanon, Baalbek. The targets included a compound and 3 additional infrastructures relating to Hezbollah's air defense. The IDF said the strikes came in response to the terror group shooting down a military drone over southern Lebanon yesterday with surface-to-air missiles. The concerns in Israel were compounded when security officials took precautions and caused massive disruptions to GPS in central and northern Israel.
והווייז משתבש ואי אפשר לדעת, הנה גם עכשיו אני בצומת דרכים לפנות ימינה, שמאלה.
יש איזה התראות שאולי ישלחו לכאן טילי שיוט או כטב"מים, משהו שהם מונחי GPS. מנסים להבנתי לשבש את זה, וזה הרעיון בעיקרו.
There was reportedly a tense phone call this weekend between U.S. President Biden and Prime Minister Netanyahu on the conduct of the IDF in the war in Gaza. But after the call, Biden told reporters Israel is doing what he asked for. More from ILTV's William Sharon.
President Joe Biden rejected the suggestion that he was abandoning Israel. After reportedly the president told Prime Minister Netanyahu the U.S. won't be able to support Israel if there's no change of course on Gaza. When asked whether he had threatened to stop military aid to Israel in the call with Netanyahu, Biden replied that he was satisfied with the Israeli response.
Did you threaten to stop military aid to Israel?
I asked them to do what they're doing.
According to the White House, Biden was referring to Israel heeding his demand to let aid into Gaza.
Now, as I'm sure you're all aware, the president had a chance to speak with Prime Minister Netanyahu earlier today. On that phone call, the president emphasized that the strikes on humanitarian workers and the overall humanitarian situation in Gaza are unacceptable. He made clear the need for Israel to announce and to implement a series of specific, concrete, and measurable steps to address civilian harm, humanitarian suffering, and the safety of aid workers. He made clear that U.S. policy with respect to Gaza will be determined by our assessment of Israel's immediate action on these steps. He underscored that an immediate ceasefire is essential to stabilize and improve the humanitarian situation and to protect innocent civilians. And he urged the Prime Minister to empower his negotiators to conclude a deal without delay to bring the hostages home.
The White House hinted that the U.S. policy could change if Israel does not heed the warnings.
I'm not going to preview any potential policy decisions coming forward. What we want to see are some real changes on the Israeli side. You know, if we don't see changes from their side, there'll have to be changes from our side. But I won't preview what that could look like.
The Gaza war has taken a heavy toll on diplomatic relations in addition to the high cost for Israel. Tensions between the U.S. and Israel have continued to grow despite President Biden's initial strong support for the Jewish state. Here to speak with us about the current challenges between the U.S. and Israel is Colonel Miri Eisen. Colonel Eisen, thank you so much for joining us today. First off, what is going on between Israel and the U.S. following Biden's phone call to Netanyahu? Is Biden turning his back on Israel?
Never. And I say in that sense that we need to differentiate between the very core, hard U.S. support, and just think of the different terms. There's the prime minister, there's the president, those are two individuals. There are the countries, and that's something broader. And this administration has given enormous backing to Israel throughout. There are a lot of different voices that we hear there, and there are different ways on how different countries view this war. But I think that that basic support is still there. I am not worried that suddenly the United States is going to turn its back on the state of Israel.
Now, it seems the U.S. has acted in solidarity with Israel militarily throughout this 6 months, but continued to talk in the public sphere as if Israel is in the wrong in terms of humanitarian aid, civilian casualties. Is this U.S. criticism of Israel for show?
I don't think it's just for show. And I think that in its own way, we live, and I don't mean this in a bad way, but we do live in our bubble inside Israel. What most people don't understand is how in Israel, we're a country at war. We're sitting here right now trying to figure out if we should be buying a generator because the war against Hezbollah is going to expand, or because we still have both casualties and challenges. Our hostages have not come home. So when we say the humanitarian situation, there's no question whatsoever that in Israel, we view ourselves very strongly. We're looking at it from our point of view. We don't necessarily see everything that's happening on the Gaza side. We have our own opinion about that. And in that sense, I do think that we should listen to others. We don't have to close our ears. And at the end, we're going to act in the way which is the safest for Israel. Part of that is working with the United States, I think.
Now, Israel is undoubtedly fighting a war against the Islamic Republic with its multiple proxies. Is the Biden administration's Iran policy affecting Israel's ability to fight back and defend itself?
Let's not compare Israel to the United States right now as a world power. In that sense, it's saying that what the United States does is the equivalent of Israel. We are most definitely in Israel a regional power. We're a regional power most definitely under attack by Iran, by the proxies, by those who are supporting these horrific voices. Having said that, what the United States can do as a world power, what the United States can do with its enormous both military power, but also its economic and soft power, is something that Israel cannot aspire to. I think that the United States views the set of tools that they have for combating with Iran in a different way. I right now most definitely think that Iran needs to be faced militarily. They're getting away with things that they shouldn't be allowed to. But each country looks at it in a different way.
Now, the ultimate question, is the U.S. going to back off and allow Israel to finish the job? And what can Israel do to ensure that the world understands this necessity of removing Hamas from power?
I feel that our biggest failure in this war has been our lack of capability to convey to the world not just the threat that Hamas is to the existence of the state of Israel, which I didn't think before October 7th, but that the continued, let alone victory of Hamas in standing at the end of this world, what that will do to the rest of the world. We have a lot of work in front of us. I do think that the administration does understand that. They understand the implications of Hamas. We all need to differentiate between the humanitarian, and it's a disaster. I mean, I don't think that the world is making this up, between the humanitarian challenge that is there that we need to access, that we need to do our best, and at the exact same time, we need to destroy Hamas. Let's go hand in hand together on this very important challenge that we have with the United States, not against them.
Colonel Miri Eisen, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching, like and subscribe.